Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lightbringers Divine Love Journey Story by Judy Dunbar today. Judy's from Gibsons, BC, Canada. And with me today are Yvonne and Beth. I'm Lorraine Borchers, now from Dallas, Oregon, and looking forward, Judy, to hearing your story and visiting with you. Beth and Yvonne, would you give a brief summary of yourselves, where you live?
Yes.
I'm Yvonne, and I'm from Central Pennsylvania.
And I'm Beth, and I'm from Lincolnshire in the UK.
Thank you. And we'll have a brief opening prayer led by Beth, and then Judy will just start her story. We'll have a conversation after you've finished.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, gracious God, we thank you for bringing us together on this beautiful sunny day. We're here today to listen to Judy's story as she shares her divine love journey with us all. Bless her as she talks to us, and we pray that all listening to this sharing will feel God's love and know that he cares deeply for each one of us. We love you so much, dear Father. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Beth. And I'd like to note that this is August 11th, 2022.
Thank you, Beth, for that beautiful opening prayer. So I'm really happy to be here presenting my story. I've been praying for divine love for about 4 decades, and I hope it inspires the listener to seek the blessings of the Creator's love. It really has brought me such healing and upliftment and so many blessings in my life. So my story is a long one because it spans 4 decades. So I have written it out. So I live in Gibsons, BC with my husband, Gary. I have had my share of struggles, as we all do. And as I turned to God, help and upliftment were lovingly provided during these times. Born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, and second youngest of 6 children, my parents grew up in 2 separate worlds. My father on a small potato farm in an isolated patriarchal community on Prince Edward Island on the East Coast, and my mother on the West Coast in the city of Vancouver. During World War II, my adventurous mother joined the Navy as a nurse's aide. There she met my father, a naval recruit. She experienced great culture shock when they married after the war, and my father took her home to the farm. She soon was busy raising 3 children without running water and only a horse and buggy for transport. When her youngest child died suddenly, my grief-stricken mother left Prince Edward Island with her 2 surviving children, John and Jean, and of course, all of you know G. She traveled cross-country by train to join her mom and sister in Vancouver. My father followed a few months later, and within a few short years, myself and 2 other siblings were born. Her decision to leave PEI changed the course of my life, and I am just so grateful to her for finding the strength and the courage to do this. I was born during a very stressful time for my family. My mother suffered from grief and postpartum depression, while my father struggled with grief and anger. He faced several challenges settling into his new surroundings and seeking ways to support his family. Trauma experienced during these early years led me to pursue counseling, art therapy, and other self-healing modalities as an adult. My parents didn't attend church or practice any religion. Together with my granny and aunt, they instilled within me a love for nature a strong work ethic, and a moral code. Jean had heard about the spiritual practice of divine love and attempted to tell me about it when I was a teenager. But I had a frightening experience with a spirit that night, and I didn't want to hear anything more about it. I was a rather rebellious teenager, and I enjoyed the increased independence the wages from my first job gave me at age 14. I skipped school, smoked pot, and experimented with other drugs. And then a whole new world opened up for me at age 16 when I started working at Ward Air, where my sister Jean worked. There, I was exposed to a host of new role models, feminists in their 20s and 30s, who were all busy planning trips abroad. And overseas travel became my primary goal. And as soon as high school was completed, I went to Europe, and other trips soon followed. And inspired by those, I applied for a work permit for Australia. My first introduction to divine love healing was during this period, when I arranged for a close friend to receive healing from Jean's new boyfriend, Al Fike. This in itself was remarkable, as Jean was at university in Utah, and she doesn't remember telling any family members about Al's healing gifts. And Al, we hadn't met him. He was very shy. My friend, who had a severe uterine infection, had been told by doctors she needed a hysterectomy. After her second healing with Al, he told her he felt everything was fine. And indeed it was. She later went on to give birth to 2 children. And the doctors at the time had told her that she'd had a miraculous recovery. At 21, I left college and my job at Ward Air and spent nearly 2 years living out of a backpack, traveling throughout the South Pacific, New Zealand, and Australia. And this 2-year trip sparked my spiritual journey. During one solo mountain hike in New Zealand, I experienced a loving presence accompanying me, and this sense of protection has stayed with me for much of my life. Gary joined me in Australia, and together we traveled through Southeast Asia, Nepal, and India. And during this time, we witnessed much joy and love in people who had very little. And we were uplifted by the beauty of creation, the magnificence of the forests, the mountains, creatures, birds, and sea life. My curiosity about God was triggered by the diverse religious practices we encountered, such as Hindu cremation processions, child monks with begging bowls, and temples laden with gold. In Nepal, we hiked a well-known pilgrimage to Muktanath, a sacred site where a flame burned over water. I was able to tune into the spiritual energies at this sacred place and was touched by the loving sincerity of some pilgrims we encountered. They had walked from India carrying few possessions, and yet their eyes just were filled with joy and love. This trip instilled in me lifelong learning experiences, and at 23, I returned home with greater patience, compassion, gratitude, and an open mind. Well, at least a more open mind. At this time, I decided to return to university for a teaching degree. When it was completed, Gary and I traveled through Costa Rica, and before returning home, we eloped in Florida. These were exciting years for us. I had a wonderful job at Career Focus, a training school for physically disabled adults and employment disadvantaged women, and Gary worked as a commercial fisherman. We enjoyed the company of many friends, were very fit, and spent a great deal of our time hiking and wilderness camping. And we were always planning a trip. Then one sleepless night, I had a dark night of the soul experience. Essentially, I was overcome with a strong feeling that I was incapable of loving anyone or anything. And during this gut-wrenching experience, I called out to God for help. And after this night, I felt drawn to accompany Jean and Al to the Divine Love Circle they had been attending for many years at Barbara Davies' home. And this changed my life, the course of my life. And I have been praying for divine love with varying degrees of frequency and fervency for the rest of my life. So Barbara Davies was an extraordinary person and a powerful medium. I loved her dearly. She was a beautiful role model and mentor for me. Barb lived a life of service, supporting the most marginalized people in the community with advocacy and practical help. Although she wouldn't take any nonsense and call things the way she saw them, she always looked upon others with love. Barb counseled me in my work with disadvantaged people and later as an art and play therapist and primary teacher. She guided me in many ways upon my spiritual path. She was at the center of a closed divine love circle, which included Bert and Shirley Sandheim, Terry Adler, Al and Jean, and other dear souls who were drawn for various periods of time. As Barb, Bert, and Shirley had prayed in Alec Gaughan's circles before his death, Barb's circles followed the divine love culture that Alec has established. I sat next to Bert in the circles and always felt tremendous energy passing from his hand into mine. I never wanted to let go of holding his hand. Although it was some time before I could tangibly feel God's loving touch bathing my soul, this energy combined with the sense of peace I felt, along with the fascination with the messages from our celestial teachers, kept me attending the circles. My soul drew me to circle during those times when my mind could think of umpteen things I should or could be doing. I discovered God always responded with upliftment, blessings, and opportunities to my sincere prayerful efforts. I haven't always had the wisdom, faith, or strength to follow up with the guidance and opportunities given, but they were provided nonetheless. Bert always encouraged me to pray for the cloak of protection, which I do regularly. I have kept my guardian angels quite busy in the past, especially during our travels. On 3 occasions in particular, when danger was present, I managed to avert physical harm by listening to the spidey sense, which flooded my consciousness. I believe this is evidence of my guardian angels at work and God's loving care for me. The greatest blessing of my life was the gift of our son, Peter. As a couple, we struggled with infertility for years. And one day during an art therapy session, I created an image of a baby in clay. All of my longings and prayers for a child were expressed and sent to God in this image, and Peter was born exactly 9 months later. When working as a teacher art therapist, I often prayed for help for a child or my whole class. And I discovered that help was always given in some way, although it might not take the form that I expected. My spiritual circle expanded when we moved to Gibson's on the Sunshine Coast, a 40-minute ferry ride from West Vancouver. Jean and Al had moved to Gibson's and started a circle there, attended by a small core group that included Betty Owen and Jane Gartshore. And I continued to attend the West Van circles too, which were hosted by Barbara and Terry. And these were also growing. In 2012, Jean and Al hosted a retreat in their home in Gibson's, which was attended by 45 people, many who were longtime Divine Love followers. And that's where I met Percy Hayes and his amazing daughters, Darlene Gaunt and Dorothy Clausen, Helga Merker from Namibia, and Jeff Cutler from Australia. And several people from the US came too, including Elizabeth Marana, and a whole group of longtime Divine Love followers from the First Church of Divine Truth. Those included Dave Lampron, Ruth Duval, Holly Bianco, Joan Warden, Michael Nedball, and his wife Carolyn. And of course, each of these dear souls have impacted my life in some way. After the retreat, Jean and Al created the Divine Love Sanctuary Foundation and invited me to join the board. Establishing mission statements, a website, and planning retreats was a very exciting time for us. The following year, I attended a retreat at the World Healing Center in Blackpool, England. And then in 2014, a retreat in Ireland. And then the big one later in Washington, D.C. for the 100th anniversary of the Paget Messages. And that's where I met Maureen Cardoso, Jimbo Walsh, Bill Fraze, and many others for the first time. And of course, these folks have become important in the Divine Love work. 2015 was a milestone for me with a significant retreat held in Gibson's that drew over 50 people from the US, Europe, Australia, Namibia, and Western Canada, as well as the Gibson's and West Vancouver home groups. And my DL travels took me to Oceanside, India, Hawaii, New York, and Pennsylvania to participate in DL retreats, workshops, and prayer circles. By this time, the Fikes had opened up their home as a retreat center and built a guest house on their property high above the Gibson's Harbor. And so I've been very fortunate to attend many retreats and home groups held there, and of course, to share prayers and stories with many people from around the world. In addition to my Divine Love work, I'm a founding board member of Children's Sanctuary Namibia Society, a registered Canadian charity we formed to support Helga Merker's work with orphaned and vulnerable children in Namibia. And one of the highlights in my life occurred in 2019 when the doors opened for myself and Betty Owen and Diane Mawson to join Helga in Namibia for a month-long retreat of service. This trip is another example of God responding to my prayers as well as to the prayers of others. So my relationship with God and with my soul continues to grow and unfold. For the past 5 summers, I have spent several days in silent retreat at the Hermitage Cabins on Bowen Island. And I just love this time away in devotion to God. In 2017, I joined a group of 7 people at Al and Jean's Center for a 2-month intensive retreat, praying for the opening of our spiritual gifts and God's plan for the salvation of humanity. And during this intense time of prayer, I received many, many blessings. And I continue to pray frequently with this group. In 2020, I joined Maureen Cardoso's Healing Development Circle, where I met more amazing people on their soul paths. And then in 2021, I felt guided to join 12 others for an intensive prayer retreat. And our group is called the DV Dozen. And in these groups, God and our angel friends, they minister to us and they help with the opening of our gifts for avenues of service. With each sincere prayer for divine love, my soul grows incrementally in the love. And as the love goes in, non-loving conditions such as fears, anxiety, and negative judgments must be let go. And I feel myself being used as a channel of love and healing in some way every day. Divine love is the most powerful, transformative force available to humanity, and it's free. You just need to ask for it. When one commits to this path, you are blessed with the company of angels. You grow closer to God and come to know your own soul. It's the highest and simplest path available to humanity, a soul journey that leads to greater personal harmony and to greater harmony on earth. I hope my story inspires you to seek God's wondrous gift of love. Thank you.
Oh, Judy, thank you so much. Your story certainly inspires me. And I'm delighted to hear about the manifestations that you experienced and the protection that you have, that you've recognized and followed. Thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome. Yes, that's really been a huge blessing in my life. And having these, this flood of energy, awareness, I know has changed the course of my life. Just briefly, in one scenario, Gary and I, we were camping, sleeping in the back of our truck, actually. It was very late at night on a roadside. And this is something we had done quite regularly on a 2-month trip through Alaska and northern BC. And, you know, we were used to just settling in and calming down and having a good night's sleep. And I was just overcome with a sense of dread. And interestingly enough, Gary shared it. And we looked out and we could see, we had heard a car pull up, but it was off in the distance. And we saw, it looked like 2 men get out of the car and they put balaclavas over their face, opened the trunk, and it looked like they had a weapon. And Gary, there was an opening from the back of the truck where we were sleeping into the cab, a window, and he just crawled through and took off. And that's just one example. It's, it's been quite amazing having that protection of the angels.
Indeed.
Could I ask a question, Judy? I was really interested when you said that for a lot of your life you've kept your guides busy and you get this spidey sense. Can you tell me what that spidey sense is? I think everybody is interested in it, because it's a thing about guardian angels. Everybody is desperate to actually make that connection, and perhaps your explanation might help.
And Beth, I'm not sure how to answer that really. It's more, a sense of knowing or a sense of alert or an awareness that comes. And most of the time, it is just a sense of love. As when I was walking that first time, I really became aware of it. I was all alone. I actually hadn't even started praying for divine love yet. And I was hiking in New Zealand, and I just felt a presence next to me and walking alongside of me. And I just think it's, how people have different gifts. And I guess this is just one of my gifts that I have. And I am not someone who easily knows or recognizes who different angels or spirits are. And, that's something that I often envy when I see others say, oh, Faith was with me, or, describing that person or who the angel was or spirit was. I don't have that. I just seem to have a general sense. And I know it's grown and developed as my private prayer practice has grown and developed. I tended in my story to focus on, group prayer experiences because it highlights the community. Because I've been very, very blessed, as have Jean and Al and Terry. We've never been on this path on our own. We've each started the path under the, care of incredible mentors. And what a blessing that has been for all of us and continues to be so. Yeah. So I know, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, I think that's lovely to hear you say a knowing, because I think a lot of people do have, sometimes are aware of someone or some influence or something near them. And I think actually what you said is helpful because it is actually saying, yes, listen and be aware and take notice, because you had that amazing escape that day, and that is part of protection and guides work looking after you. So no, thank you. That was helpful.
And I just want to add too, of course, all of us have that capacity to some degree. And I think what the difference for me has been in my life is aspiring for the highest. And that has made the difference, because I know when I was a troubled teenager, I can recall a couple of experiences which I know were lower earth, more earthbound spirits. Mm-hmm. So it was making that conscious choice as well to aspire for something higher.
Something I think that would help people who are not quite understanding what that presence is when you feel that someone is looking at you and you turn and indeed they are, it's that sense that it's much like that. And I think we've all experienced that when it feels like somebody's looking at you and you turn and look, and is that what you're kind of describing? That would be the very beginning of that sense.
I think that's part of it. For me, often it feels like a bit of an embrace, like a warm
right.
embrace. Yeah.
I'm just thinking at the beginning.
At the beginning,
haven't
yes.
experienced it. That might be a way to look at it. Mm-hmm. And then when you talked about always being with others on the divine love path, how fortunate you are, because many people just are on their own. But I want to say that when you're on your own, eventually you will meet others. The law of attraction, you actually that was my case. I was by myself for a while, and then amazing people started coming into my life. So if you've started with divine love on your own, stay with it, because there's more to come. Many blessings will come.
That's so true, Lorraine.
Judy, I just absolutely love your story. It is so beautiful and it's so uplifting to everyone. And I think a lot of people are going to listen to your story and be able to relate to your journey. And I think my question sort of piggybacks on what both Beth and Lorraine had said. I think one of the things that when I speak with people on the divine love path, and people not on the divine love path necessarily, but just people that are close to God, one of the things that they struggle with is not having that validation. And I think I struggled with it. I don't think, for the big part of my life, I really recognized the fact that I was truly being guided. And there were more things happening to me spiritually than I realized. And when I found divine love, and then I had that connection that I could not dispute, that I knew was from God, and that built, that faith in me and that trust in me, that I was being guided, and that my angels were giving me little ideas in my ears. Is there anything that you can share that might help someone else at the beginning of their journey, or maybe not even being on the divine love journey yet, to help them get more in tune with their intuition, so that experience happens, or that something happens that really gives them that moment of, gee, maybe there's something going on here, more than just, my thoughts.
For me, I have always taken respite in nature and finding that those quieter places, and also breathing, just especially when I'm out in the forest or by the ocean. And I think sometimes when we can remove ourselves from, others for even a short period of time, or get away from busyness and get into nature, or work in the garden or whatever, that's when so much of my inspiration comes to me, and my awareness comes to me, or else in the shower for some reason as well. And I think it's just, starting to have confidence. That's a challenge, of course, to start believing in it. But, it's like an incremental kind of thing. And I guess just find that gumption within you to put aside your doubts and that inner critic, and think, I'm going to give my soul a chance. I'm going to give my higher self a chance here. And one of the things that I do is I can always remember this saying from Confucius. It was in a message years ago. And he said, there is always a moment to go to God. And when I am struggling with something, because let's face it, life can be so stressful, I try to remember that and just take a breath and think of God and long for God and think, God, this is my moment with you. And it does help uplift. The other thing I do is I sometimes say a very simple mantra as I'm walking from one place to another, to love, to love, to love. I am a child of God and a channel of love. And that helps energize and uplift me as well. So just simple little things I try. But
I just love that. I just love give your soul a chance. I think we forget about our soul, and so much of that spiritual, that love comes from our soul. And so I love that, give your soul a chance to speak to you, so that you can hear it. Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you.
I'm so pleased too, Judy, that you've actually said about you've put the soul and the higher self together as the same. I was going to say unit, but there's so many people talk about their higher selves, and I'm not sure what that is. And to actually hear you say your soul, because it's very difficult for people, especially people new to the path, to understand what the soul is. And I think that's a very helpful analogy for people.
I feel prompted just to share some advice or a suggestion from Barbara that she gave to me years and years ago on my path. I was having a conversation with her, saying that in my private prayers, when I try to pray to God, my mind is just so busy and I struggle. And she had the impression that I should pray aloud.
Oh,
And I, of course, never went to church or anything. So I never had many examples of prayer. And I certainly, as a child, never prayed. And so I started that, and that made a huge difference for me. It helped quiet my mind. And I also, it was like having a conversation with God. And God didn't seem so far away as when I started to pray aloud. God felt closer to me, and it seemed the possibility of having a personal relationship with God just seemed, more tangible, real.
Yeah.
wow, I love hearing that. Yeah. Also, while you were responding to Yvonne's question, you said, I wrote it down, this is my moment with you, God. I love that. That was so perfect, because I think people, and I'm speaking from personal experience, but also from here listening to others, we often don't know how to speak with God. We're some of us have been raised in formal churches. We have the prayers, but speaking one-on-one. So this is my moment with you, God, was just perfect. Thank you. Something that you've alluded to is messages. I'm wondering if you could just take a brief few moments and tell the audience what messages you're talking about.
Well, right from my introduction to divine love at a circle at Barbara Davies' home, she was a beautiful, beautiful medium. And of course, she was channeling messages from celestial angels. Augustine and Kia Atikim, Confucius, they were the main teachers that, Jesus, Saretikim. And so these messages, we would listen to them, and they were teachings, they were guidance for us. And, always we would start a prayer with reading one of the messages, because they were recorded and transcribed. And, I always had messages to refer to, and they've taught me so much. And as the gifts of the mediums, for example, Al, because Al's gift of mediumship started to grow about 15, 18 years ago. He was more known for his gifts of healing prior to that. But as the gifts of the medium grow, the quality and the possibility of higher truths and teachings come through. And so I've learned so much just by transcribing those and reading those. And yeah, very big blessing in my life
So
and
these
a
are
comfort.
definitely, these are words that come through that individual. The
Yes,
words
through the
are
medium.
given to them from those in spirit. Yeah. We've lost Yvonne, but I expect she'll be back. Yes, I think that that is one area of the divine love path that some people have a hard time understanding and even accepting.
And that's okay.
It is.
You don't need to accept that. You can go to God with an open soul and just long for God's touch and love. It's as simple as that. Everything else is pretty well a complication.
Right. It's that simple, isn't it?
Yes.
And eventually you will feel it if you don't feel it right away. It's kind of like that, what you were talking about, Beth, the spidey sense. People don't understand,
Yes.
don't know what that is, but yeah, divine love is an amazing thing to receive. It's like the love between a mother and a child. We all have a mother, and it's 100 times that, isn't it?
Yes. So beautifully put,
It's
Lorraine.
hard to describe, but it's that. So whatever special love one has in our lives, it's magnified many times.
Yeah,
God's
so
love.
many times. Yeah.
And
And the
I
other
want everybody to experience that.
Me too.
Yeah,
One
that's
of
why
the-
we're doing these stories.
yes, to get it across. One of the things that I've asked everybody, Judy, in all of these life stories is the last question's always, what brings you the most joy? But I think you've probably answered it. I don't know whether you want to add any more to that, but
It's being with God in God's creation, and especially when I'm holding the hand of a loved one and just feeling the magnificence, the joy, the beauty of creation, and the love within my soul. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a beautiful answer.
lovely. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for being here with us today and for taking the time to write your story and share it with us. Thank you, Beth, for being here. And Yvonne, I know you'll be listening. Thank you for contributing as well. It's always great to have these conversations. Thank you, Judy.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure.
God bless you during the rest of your day, both of you.
And you too.
You too.
Goodbye now.
Goodbye.
Bye.